Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is award-winning filmmaker and producer Loretta Todd. Todd has also created children's programming that airs on APTN. Her very first feature film, Monkey Beach, based on the novel by Eden Robinson, was just released on streaming services. Loretta, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very much, I'm excited about talking to you about Monkey Beach.
Well, and your resume is pretty impressive, but let's start with Monkey Beach that has just premiered on Crave, but it did open at the Vancouver Film Festival last year. What was the reaction?
Well, it was really lovely because it was actually shown in the theater. With COVID precautions, of course, there was maximum 50 people, and then also what was great about Vancouver Film Festival is they also opened it in theaters around the province. So it actually got to also open the same night in Terrace, which is the town closest to Kitimat. And it also opened in, a lot of other towns in BC. So it was exciting to know that while we were sitting in Vancouver, it was also being seen elsewhere in British Columbia. And the response was amazing. Terrace held it over beyond the film festival. They had 18 sold-out programs, and then after the sort of success of the Vancouver Film Festival, Cineplex called us up and said, "Hey, you guys are doing really well. We'd love to show it in our theater." So then it moved to the theaters in places where, of course, the theaters were still open, and it became the #1 Canadian film in the theaters for about 4 weeks as well.
I had the chance to watch it, as I said last night, on Crave, but you worked on this a long time, based on the book of Eden Robinson's book that came out 20 years ago, and it's been a long journey for you too. We did a story about the opening that you're just speaking about, but I understand you said it took about 15 years for you to bring it to the screen. Can you tell us a bit about that process?
Well, I always believed. I never gave up. So, but I can't say it was always easy. Of course, I started my journey originally with Jeff Bear, who's another Indigenous producer, filmmaker. And then we sort of, we had some, wanted to go in different creative directions. So, we amicably ended working together. And it was, trying to make a living and at the same time trying to still drive the film and find ways to make it happen. I knocked on many doors. I even went to billionaires. I thought, oh, gee, maybe one of those billionaires who wants to give away all their money might want to, fund this really important film. So it was a journey. And all along, I, of course, got support from Telefilm. But at the same time, they would always just say, oh, well, the script's too long. The script's not quite there yet. So there was always these kind of delays. And then in the meantime, like I say, I had to make a living. So I'm also producing children's series that APTN broadcast, which is so lovely. But yeah, it was. I never gave up, and that's my message to any filmmaker out there: never give up. You may have to shift, you may have to move a little, go this way, go that way, but don't give up. If you believe in it and you really want to do it, don't give up.
What was it about Eden's book Monkey Beach that made you want to continue pursuing it and not giving up?
Well, there was two parts to that. I mean, I think one, as a filmmaker, it was such a, in a way, challenge. It was such an amazing challenge to take this iconic book, this book that just grew in popularity, grew and almost sort of into the psyche of, people's, across Canada, in fact, around the world. It's daunting. How do you take that, novel and find a way to make it live on the screen? And so that as a filmmaker, that was sort of a challenge that I didn't want to just bypass and, put aside. It was such a cinematic book. It's so beautiful. Lisa, the character, I identify with in many ways myself. Not that I have supernatural powers, but that certainly this idea of embracing your medicine. I think it has a strong message for Indigenous women, and as a filmmaker, of course, a strong message about, embracing your own medicine, embracing your own power. That was something that was really important to me. At the very beginning, the reason I even optioned it was because I was at an event, and this other filmmaker came up to me and said, "Gee, you should option Eden's book." And I hadn't read it yet, and although I wanted to, of course, but she said it's because her writing's like your filmmaking. And I thought, oh, well, then I have to definitely read it. And of course, when I read it, there was this incredible character, this, amazing, family, all the way that, Eden textures, all these times and places, how she's, it's so elliptical in her storytelling. So all those things were just, drew me in, and of course, I had to turn it into a film.
Of course, there's Indigenous actors in the film, but there's Indigenous involvement behind the scenes as well. How important was it to have as much Indigenous involvement in this production as possible?
Well, from the beginning, when Jeff and I started out, we were trying to do all produced, all directed, all written, all crewed by Indigenous people. And we were ahead of our time, I guess. Certainly there's enough good people out there to do that. But I guess by the time we got to making it, I had to kind of confront the issues of unions and so on. And but it was all really important to me. I was helped by people along the way, and Indigenous people who wanted to see the film get made. So that was really important. I was also, as working with the children's series over the years, I've been able to get to know a lot of really amazing, talented Indigenous people who are working in crew, working in camera departments, working in lighting departments, working in, all the various departments that go into making a film. So I got as many of them as I could up to Kitimat, and then also, reached out to as many people in the community in Kitimat, and that was sort of part of the process. It was a challenge to film in Kitimat, but I was determined to do it. So it's like an 18-hour drive from Vancouver. But nonetheless, I was just determined to do it as an act of reciprocity. And I thought it was really important to include the community. And I was so lucky. There were so many amazing women, especially from Kitimat, who worked in the locations department. And as you know, in locations, you're the first one there and the last one to leave. And those women some of them took time off work to, come work on the film, or they had families at home, and yet they were still working those long hours. They were really amazing. We did a lot of boats. There's a lot of boats in the film, and then the safety boats that you're not seeing that's off camera. And, those were all, I was able to hire those boats, charter those boats from, the local village. So it was really important to me, and I was so helped by, some of our, if you see in the credits, there's amazing people like, Carla Robinson, who, from the village, and is Eden's sister, and also Richard Van Camp, and Roseanne Archibald, and Lucretia Din, who, kind of didn't let me give up either. So yeah, it's always important to me. On my children's series, Coyote's Crazy Smart Science Show on APTN, Saturday and Sunday mornings, they, almost exclusively Indigenous crew.
And we're going to talk about that show in a bit here. And you talk about shooting in Kitimat. It looks absolutely beautiful as somebody who's never been there, but it looks great on the screen. It's been a big year for Eden Robinson with Monkey Beach and Trickster, both debuting on the big and small screen, although, there has been the controversy around Trickster with director Michelle Latimer's claims to Indigenous identity being called into question. As a longtime Indigenous filmmaker, how did that revelation make you feel?
Well, it's so complex. It's, you don't want to say too much because, I have respect for Eden. And, but, people have to be responsible, and Michelle seems to be seeing the consequences of those fictions, and so she's taking responsibility. I believe she is for that. It's difficult because, I know who I am, I know where I come from. But, in the Indigenous community, there's always these, lateral violences. And so I've experienced people saying, oh, you're not Native, and so it's you think, well, how would that feel, but the thing is, she she took her white privilege and brought it into our space. And all of us who were struggling every day just to be able to get the resources to do what we need to do to tell our stories, were then given smaller space. So I think that's the most, as a filmmaker, that's I think most of us would probably, I'm not speaking for other filmmakers, but I think that's something that we've all experienced. Not having a little space, having little access, not having white privilege. But on the bigger issue, it's very complex. It's a very complex issue. So I don't even know what more I could say about it. I could say a lot more about it, but I don't know whether this is the forum for it right now. But let's just say 15 years to make Monkey Beach. But I was ahead of my time, so I'm not putting it all on white privilege.
And Loretta, we're going to talk more about, the struggles of Indigenous storytelling and your children's programming and your app. We do just have to step aside for a quick break here, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with Loretta Todd. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is director, producer, and as we'll find out, many other things, Loretta Todd. Loretta, how would you describe, though, right now the state of Indigenous storytelling on screen?
Well, I think one of the terms that bothered me most about what came up around Michelle Latimer was something she said, which was called reclaiming Indigenous stories. We don't need to reclaim Indigenous stories. We've been telling Indigenous stories since time immemorial, and we'll continue to tell them into, 7 generations and 7 generations beyond, and so on. So the stories have always been who we are. We know that. That's, we are a story. And if they were never any screens, it wouldn't matter. We would still tell a story, and we'd still be storytellers. So. So that's something that I think is really important to who we are. The fact that we're telling telling stories on screen now is something that's, is critical to who we are. It's, we adapt technologies, no matter what those technologies are. And of course, many of us have been, working on making films for a number of years, for decades, really. I like to think of this one person called Freddie Alexie, who was an artist, a Shimshan Mohawk artist on the West Coast, who made lantern paintings. Those ones that from about 1900, where they would paint on glass, and then they would put one in front of the other, and then move them with fire or light behind them, and so that they would look like they were animated. And he was doing those in the Longhouse, where he grew up, and. So, he could have been the first filmmaker. So how long ago was that? That was over 100 years ago. So, we've been using this technology wherever we could find, because it's as an extension of the expression of who we are. A lot has changed. Of course, when I started out, over 25 years ago, we supported one another. We were, a small fledgling group of Indigenous filmmakers, but we were as best we could. We tried to be as inclusive. We tried to expand the circle as best we could. There was limited resources, and there's always that kind of colonial mentality that sort of says, you can only have this much. And when they do that, then there's all those kinds of divisions and all those kinds of, we should be working together, and then suddenly everyone's sort of not working together because we're all kind of, trying to divvy up that little bit of what they say we can have. So that's, I think, is an issue we have to overcome. Of course, there has been efforts. And, I can speak of good people within all those institutions within Canada that, have been partners in, our screen, or, bringing our stories to screen. So there's always been good people with good minds and good hearts. And, I think those people have to be acknowledged. And, those kind of partnerships have to always be recognized. But there's been so many struggles. I think one of the struggles that Indigenous filmmakers are dealing with right now is this whole partnership, 51-49% thing. That's a big issue. I know that there's not enough funds, and the Canadian system likes to just create this idea of, a few stars as sort of celebrity culture. I think if I had my way, when the Hudson's Bay was sold off, because they were losing money, and I'm thinking, we made the Hudson's Bay. There would be no Hudson's Bay if it wasn't for Indigenous people, for our Indigenous land. So really, we should have taken it over for $1, and that is at least one act of reciprocity. Well, sometimes I think that about the cultural institutions in Canada. It shouldn't be a matter of just, here's your fraction, here's how much you get, and you can administer it or you can't administer it depending on what's going on within the institution at the time. It should be, this is the least, just you have like as much as we have and more, because this is the only place where these stories exist, is in this land. These stories are the basis, the core, the essence of this land, and they should be at the center of all storytelling in Canada.
Loretta, just to pivot away, you also do a lot of programming for children. Much of it airs here on APTN as well. Just why is that such an important thing for you to take on children's programming?
Well, I take my role seriously as a matriarch. I really believe it's important to give back. I really believe that it's important to encourage our children, and our children don't see themselves enough on the screen. So right from the beginning, I felt that's something I needed to do, is for our people to see themselves on screen, and especially our children. So that was really important. And also it was important for me, when you produce children's programming, you watch a lot of children's programming. And, as much as, there's these, you got to think about what are the values at the core of those children's series. And, very often the people who are producing those shows like Sesame Street and so on, they're good values. They want to teach children empathy and confidence and, support, and they want them to feel good about themselves. And I would say that about all children's programming. But there's still these kind of edges, that I watch them and I go, gee, there's so much about competition. There's so much about, I don't know, there's still this idea of, a chosen few, there's just, I don't know, there's still some issues that I find with some children's programming. So it was really important for me to bring our values into that space of children's programming, and to sort of represent those values in, storytelling and even in the way we go about making those stories. Like I say, for all those series, I've hired Indigenous directors, Indigenous writers, Indigenous cinematographers, editors, people in the office, so it's important for me to do that as a way of giving back, of, redistribution of wealth, and also to make sure that our children see themselves on the screen. And in the case of Coyote Science, Indigenous science, it wasn't that long ago we were being told we didn't have science. And even though we're seeing changes now and we're seeing more of our kids getting through high school, one of the barriers to that has been our kids in the sciences and math. So one of the, there's been many studies that show if you see yourself in the curriculum, if you see that you are part of what you are studying and supposed to learn, then you're going to do better. And, we often don't see ourselves in the science curriculum or the math curriculum. And so it was really important for me to, enhance that. I'm obviously not, producing programming that's going to be what, kids learn every day in school. I mean, I would love to influence the curriculum more, but the fact that it could be there to kind of enhance that, and they can say, hey, we have our own science. We are capable of math. We're scientists. We're engineers. We're architects. We've always been that, and they can celebrate that, and they can share that with their friends, their non-Indigenous friends. They can say, hey, look what we do. Look what we've done. Look what we're doing. And I think that's really exciting, and it's been really well received. So I feel really good about that.
Really glad you got to touch on that show there. Loretta, we do just need to step aside for one more quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with Loretta Todd. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is filmmaker and producer Loretta Todd. And Loretta, just wondering, somebody who's been around in the industry for a while and had success winning awards, what advice would you have for youth who are interested in looking into pursuing a career in film and television?
Well, there's no one way to become a filmmaker. You just have to look at all the famous filmmakers. Some never went to film school, some did go to film school. So there's no one way to become a filmmaker. I think the most important thing is, what stories do you want to tell, and how do you want to tell them? And finding ways to do that. When you look at a film, what moves you? What's the visuals? When you look out on your land or your territory, or if you live in the city, how does that look to you? Like, how would you like to represent that in a film? What is your relationship to light and shadow? Because in the end, that's what filmmaking it is. It's light and shadow. When the light hits on someone's face, or on the land, when the sun rises, how does that make you feel? How would you like to show that on the film? When you listen to your elders tell a story, how does that make you feel? What does that look like in your mind? If they don't tell you a story, how does that absence of the stories, feel to you? So I think it's really important for filmmakers to get confident with who they are as storytellers. And you can do that by going to film school. The IIDF program at CapU is really good. Shirley Chichu's school, and there's other schools across Canada. Explore those, but don't feel like if you have to go, if you don't want to leave your community, or if you don't have the means to do that. There's a lot of online courses now. I have a IM4 lab, which is a lab I created with Emily Carr University, and we teach immersive technology. Those are all online. You can, access them for free. So there's a lot of ways to get there. But I think in the end, find out who you are as a storyteller. You really have to have that confidence, because every storyteller is different. And don't try to be like that storyteller, or don't try to, emulate, when back in the day, everyone wanted to be Tarantino, and, it's great to make horror films, but do you really want to make horror films just because you think it's going to get you famous? Or would you rather do comedy? Like, what is it in your heart that would make you, that makes you want to be a filmmaker? And I think those things you have to really look at, and don't be afraid to, I always say, go get a camera, just a still camera, and you're on your phone, just go and take images. Just because when I prepare my films, I storyboard. If you look at the notebooks of the great filmmakers, like the guy who directed Pan's Labyrinth, he made this incredible notebook of what the characters would look like, what the sets would look like, all this sort of stuff. You don't even have to be a good drawer. I go into magazines and I cut out pictures and so on to kind of put these notebooks together that are my inspiration. So just start to really think like a filmmaker even before you have the camera in your hand to actually start making films.
Loretta, all amazing advice. We're out of time, but thank you so much for being with us this week.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
And that is all the time we have for this week. We'll see you back here next week.